with us. We do have our new contributing editor, Eric Frederickson, with us this morning. And I'll probably say a few words about Eric's work as we go along. This session and several others, if you look at your conference guide, are based on the CLOE surveys, which were begun 3 years ago as a collaboration between EduVentures and Quality Matters. The CLOE survey is an annual survey of chief online officers. And some of you may have already participated in it. I would encourage people who see themselves in this role to participate in the future. And if you aren't currently involved in the survey and would like to be, please drop off your business card or talk to me at the end of this session. Very few, if any, people have that actual title of Chief Online Officer. We've actually collected somewhere between 25 and 30 separate titles that people have, but you understand we're talking about someone who works to bring together all of the elements for a successful online program at their institution. And we're discovering that at least 4 out of 5 higher ed institutions, 2-year and 4-year, do have someone who fits that description. In Eric's work on online learning leaders, I would estimate it's about 80% that you were able to find that person. And then in the surveys themselves, about 1/4 of those folks actually responding. The survey is based on a few assumptions. One of those is that online learning is increasingly mainstreamed at institutions. And that generally means, I don't think I have a mainstreaming slide in this presentation. Let me see. No, I don't. So just briefly, the notion of mainstreaming is that it's now part of what the institution expects to be doing, part of the regular budget process, part of faculty expectations, and strategic planning typically will be mentioned in development and strategic plans. So we're observing this in more and more institutions, and we're conducting surveys from that perspective. And one element in mainstreaming is increasingly to concentrate responsibility on a broad range of issues in one individual. And institutions will spread out as to how far toward that goal they have gone, but there does seem to be a definite trend in that direction. The survey is an opportunity to look at institutional practices and policies, strategic plans, plans for future development, and to begin to project into the future some of the things we can expect to be happening. And our reports are free. They're downloadable from our website at QM and from the EduVentures website as well. As far as participation is concerned, we're really looking to find that one individual at the institution. We're not leaving the survey open for any faculty member or staff member to complete. We're looking for that person who self-identifies as the chief online officer. But we've grown substantially over 3 years of surveying. You can see the trend there. We hope that line continues as the survey becomes more familiar. And in terms of its scope, the institutions that participate, the growth has continued a similar pattern, and you can see the participation in green of community and technical colleges, four-year public universities, and four-year private. If we compare this to IPED's data on the total number of institutions and types of institutions that offer online courses and programs, there is a significant gap in terms of the for-profit sector. We have had a small number of for-profits participate, but not enough to be willing to make projections and analyze on that basis. So these are the three main groups that we've looked at and subgroups within them. And it's those subgroups that are the focus of this particular session. We're beginning to see models emerging from the larger number, from at this point about 280 institutions. The first group that we identified are, oops, pushing the wrong button. Here we go. The first group are the enterprise level institutions. These are public and private institutions that have more than 7,500 online students, fully online and partly online students. And we believe that at that number, which is also the threshold for the top IPEDS category, at that number, they really have coordinated the resources of the institution to promote online. They are clearly somewhat dependent for tuition revenue and enrollment on that group, and we look at them somewhat distinctively. Other groups that we've gradually come to define are the mid-sized public institutions and mid-sized private institutions, meaning they have somewhere between 1,000 and 7,500 students, some of them clearly aspiring to become part of that top group, others perfectly happy to stay where they are, almost none projecting that they want to shrink the online component of their programs. And then community colleges form a clear, distinct group. And except we have taken 3 of them from our sample that have more than 7,500 students, and they appear in the enterprise group. But the majority of community colleges are in this group. And now I'm starting to look at low enrollment institutions with under 1,000 students, very little, in many cases, very little investment in online learning at this point, perhaps not very distinctive policies, but we're in early stage of seeing whether there's coherence in that group. Why are we bothering to do this disaggregation of our data? Because we think that they reveal alternative approaches to online learning and what role it can play within the institution. And we want to try gradually to focus attention on the conditions and motives that lead them to be part of that group and characterizes a lot of their policies and practices. And ultimately, and we're perhaps still a year away from being able to do this, we want to be able to enable institutions that are not part of our survey, but who identify as in one of those groups that I put on the screen, to benchmark themselves. How are we doing? How do we handle this issue when the others in that particular model have a clear set of preferences or practices? So we think that the models can be useful. We're even considering the possibility that we would make available to any institution an analysis that compares them to the appropriate model, or perhaps to an aspirational model if they see themselves growing in a particular way in the future. To persuade you that there are differences among these models, this is, I think, one of our most convincing slides. We ask how many fully online programs the institution has. And breaking down into our models, the typical enterprise level institution is offering 60 distinct programs. And that's an average or a median number, because a number of them have considerably more, even over 100 programs is not uncommon. When we turn, whoops, I'm not going to get the hang of this. When we turn to the regional publics, these are institutions we believe should, although they may not see themselves that way, focus on their catchment area. This could be a 4-year non-flagship public institution. It could be a private institution that also draws most of its students from within a fairly concentrated area. 18 programs, less than a third, is their typical number. And community colleges, most of whom are limited to 2-year degrees and certificates, 12. So a nice hierarchy here. One other piece of information on this slide, which is of considerable importance in management. These are the average number of students per program that these different institutions have. So the enterprise, 355 students is the average number of students per one of those 60 programs. And you can see that there are economies of scale associated with that. If you look at the regional publics, average enrollment 93, under 100, one begins to question whether that is viable long term. If you've got students beginning and working through that program and the total number is under 100. And the community colleges, as you can see, fall somewhere in between. Here's some IPEDS data to judge the growth of online learning. And you can see from this line here that over the period from 2012 to 2016, IPEDS is usually about 2 years behind the present in releasing final data. But in that 4-year period, it's grown from a little under 25% enrolled in at least one distance course to 31%. At the same time, the total enrollment has declined slightly. What this means is that total enrollment is not growing. In fact, it's slipping slightly, but proportionally, more and more of it is in distance learning. And that is certainly very, very significant. But I guess one of the main points we would want to make is that this doesn't mean that all boats will rise, that online enrollment will be increasing everywhere. We can show that the trend is still continuing in a growth pattern, but not consistently across all levels. For the low enrollment schools, only 56% are reporting growth from spring 2017 to 2018. That rises to 58% for community colleges, 67% for mid-sized publics and privates, and for the enterprise institutions, 78%. Remember, they're the biggest to begin with, and they are also growing at a faster rate. But even in this picture, the green figure indicates institutions reporting some drop in online enrollment. When we first looked at this a couple of years ago, the only group that was declining in this category essentially was the community and technical college group. But now we're seeing some of the players in each category that are declining. And my prediction here, based on, again, only 3 years of data at this point, is that we're likely to see the declines increase in number as we go forward. In other words, there are going to be winners and losers. One way that we've looked at this, and this is one of Richard's slides, is that online program expansion is outpacing enrollment growth. In other words, there are more and more programs competing for a still growing but not rapidly growing student demand. You can see the first year figures here for distance enrollment growth, 1.5% and 34% program growth. Really, that shouldn't even be on the chart because that was the first year that IPEDS collected data, and a lot of programs, a lot of institutions struggled with what to report. What was an online course? What was an online program? I think that problem has been ameliorated, but isn't totally gone even today. So looking at the 3 years following, you can see that each year the growth in enrollment is much less than the growth in new programs that students have to choose from. I also looked at it a little differently, that I related the program growth in 1 year to the enrollment growth the next. And if you see the enrollment growth, the program growth is greater, leads to an uptick in the enrollment the following year, but not enough to match the number of new programs. Another way we look at the models and their attitudes and their experience, we ask them about competition. They all agree, about 85–90% agree that competition is increasing. And then we say, well, where is your competition coming from? So here you can see the top set of bars indicates how the enterprise institutions, the mid-sized publics, and the community colleges view the question of whether competition is increasing. Interestingly, the community colleges are not as concerned, although it's still a majority. Just think about where they take their students from, their own community, and they're not really worried about what's happening outside. But even there, they see about 2/3 of them see increasing competition. What types of institutions are they competing with? All three of these sectors agree pretty much that the main competition is coming from public institutions. So private institutions tell us that, other public institutions tell us that. 2-year, 4-year, they all think that their main competition is from public institutions. We thought there might be a significant number reporting for-profits as a major threat. Not so. It's really the other way around. And then we ask them where the competitors are, the ones that worry them most. Not surprisingly, the enterprise institutions competing for students on a national level, they see most of their competition coming from other institutions that recruit students without any geographic boundaries. Regional institutions, not surprisingly, they see the greatest competition coming from the region. Yes? It's a very simple definition. Do you have more than 7,500 online students? And that's it. No, no. The term, I'm using the term, the question was, how do we define on enterprise institutions? We are, and time will tell if that's a misleading designation, but it's our shorthand for institutions that have, through their efforts and policies, attracted more than 7,500 online students. And we are looking to see what policies and practices they follow that have led to that result. Right, exactly, public-private. Even for-profits, we have one or two for-profits in that group, but we don't have a separate breakout of for-profits because there weren't enough of them to generalize. And finally on this, nearby competitors, look what, who is worried about nearby competitors. Clearly, it's the community colleges that have a concern there. Yes?
Do mid-size public also include small four-year private nonprofits?
It includes mid-sized. Well, the mid-sized category is broken down into public and private. Some of the charts have the breakdown, others don't have that yet. And then the small institutions, we bring together the public and private there. As far as what their emphasis is on fully online courses as opposed to blended courses, we do see some differences among our models. The enterprise level, teaching nationally with students that can be 3,000, 4,000 miles away, or they are almost totally committed to building fully online courses. And that number steps down for regionals and steps down even further for community colleges. As far as whether blended programs are growing as rapidly as fully online programs, we see here that the greater growth is in the blue bars for fully online, blended much less. Here in this category, although the bars are short, these are programs that are planning to expand by 10 or more new programs in the next several years. Most of those are programs in the enterprise sector when we do the breakdown that way. One lesson from this is that the largest programs have the largest plans for future growth. And so we would expect to see the disparities growing over time. This is breaking that same information down another way, where you can see the red line for enterprise. 19% of the enterprise programs are planning to add at least 10 new programs in the next couple of years. And that number is much smaller in the other categories. Most programs are telling us that they plan to add a small number in the next few years. 1 to 4 programs is the category. Almost no one is planning to stay pat with their present curriculum, and almost even less planning to drop programs that perhaps are not attracting enough students. The general picture here is that the growth in the number of programs is going to continue and put pressure on institutions, which in turn will lead to more declining enrollment institutions, we believe, in the future. And we think there's some paradox involved here. I'll try to quickly explain this slide, although it's a bit complex. This comes from a separate EduVenture survey of potential adult learners. Over 1,000 adult learners, 860 in this survey, undergraduate interest, and a similar but slightly larger group for graduate. And they were asked what mode of learning would they prefer. And that red line indicates that most of them would prefer a mix, a balance of face-to-face and online instruction. It wasn't specific enough to say that means a number of fully online courses and a number of on-ground courses, or whether it could be satisfied by blended courses with an on-ground and online component. But if they're asked about their preference for a fully online program, the number never rises above about 25% of them. And as they grow in age, the number drops further. Nor do they really want a full campus experience. They really do want that mix. And yet we find the institutions, when we survey them, are going gung-ho for fully online and neglecting blended. Blended actually, in my view, is more of an accident. Students initiating and designing their own program, they can't get this requirement until a year from now, they'll take it online. They've failed a course or gotten a grade they want to improve, take the online version and see if you can do better. So they're building online blended programs, and the data suggests that students who do that have higher success rates and faster graduation rates than students that are either on ground fully or online fully. But the institutions don't seem to be focused on this at all. Are the sectors competing on pedagogy and student engagement? Because one answer might be, to be competitive, you better have a creative and innovative program. So we asked them, what happens in your online courses? And this is one of the areas where the models did not differ. Just look at that. A little over 50% of the interaction is with the course materials. About a quarter of the interaction is with faculty. A similar amount, excuse me, that's the faculty row. Communication between students, also about a quarter. Other staff, almost nothing. All sectors, all models gave us the same results on this. Where's the innovation? Where's the creativity here? There were some outliers. They ranged from a few programs that told us they were 100% focused on materials, essentially self-directed courses. A few told us that up to 30% was spent with other staff. These are the institutions that are using academic coaches and where some of that faculty burden has been shifted over to a success coach, whatever their title might be at the institution. And you can see some are really student-to-student managed courses. So these in the box represent the extremes that we found, but the averages come out pretty much the same. Online pedagogy, we looked at another way. How common are any of these activities in your online program? The common ones, long written assignments, short quizzes, short written assignments, preparatory readings, and threaded discussions. Wow. We've been doing this for 25 years, and it's emulating what happens in the classroom, and this is what's happening online. Yes, there's some experimentation. You can see all these innovative and exciting and difficult and sometimes expensive things to do, but they're not done very widely. And if the smaller and less resourceful institutions are trying to compete with the big boys on this level, what these numbers here show is that the people who are in, or the institutions that are investing the most in these activities are in fact the enterprise level institutions. So, you know, if your response as a smaller institution is, yes, we will have a more creative and a better program, the evidence is not showing that many will succeed that way. The resources to do it, the faculty comfort with it may just not be there. Alternative credentials, we hear a lot about that today. Yes, indeed, there is interest in it. How many people are actually investing in alternative credentials? Or even some slight investment, and which group is making that investment? The enterprise institutions are doing that more than others. And then the majority of institutions are divided among these three categories, either no interest, some interest, but no involvement, and some experimentation, but no investment in it. Maybe this is the coming thing. Maybe this great transformation that you'll hear a lot about in other sessions at the conference is going to happen, but it isn't showing up in the data. And how agile are institutions? This is another way of getting at the same issue. This was a question about whether your institution has gone through major change in the last few years or is planning major change in the next few years. And we can see which institutions are most involved in major change. The enterprise level institutions. Community colleges have been lagging behind in this area, are actually hoping to increase their effort in the next 3 years. Mid-sized regionals, and we really haven't had time to analyze this issue fully, are telling us that they've gone through, a third of them have gone through major change, and only about 20% of them are planning to put themselves through this again. Change is not easy, absorbing change, and we're asking them to change continuously. Just think about our keynote this morning, and I hope you kept good notes on all the things you're going to need to do in the next few years. So that is the background of this particular session and some of the things we may want to talk about. I can answer your questions, but this is really about institutions that are not part of that enterprise group, that are counting on online enrollment as an element of their offerings to either remain stable or grow in the future, to be part of this general growth that's occurring. And I'm asking you to think about what your goals are. Are you seeking to increase fully online and or blended enrollment? And if so, why? Are you trying to shore up declines in face-to-face or on-ground enrollment? Are you trying to expand your overall enrollment? Or are you trying to provide additional capacity in high-demand programs that your institution offers? These are not either-ors. It could be all or it could be none of these. Or is it serving the needs of current campus students? Is that the priority of your online learning? It doesn't matter what the effect is on enrollment. We just think online introduces elements that are of value to our students, that help the learning process. And if that doesn't increase enrollment, so be it. We still feel that this is something we need to do. Think about that. Think about whether it affects your institution. And it's even possible that you might want to answer it's some of one and some of the other in our case. And I think I'll stop there before we get into how you might approach problems like that. And just try to ask the group. You can raise questions if you like, or comment if you like. Yes?
What I hear repeatedly in Maryland from our chancellor, from a lot of our presidents at our institutions, is that we need to go online in order to build enrollments at our institutions. And I think you're absolutely right. In fact, Karen and I were just here chatting a little bit about it. You know, the competition is going to be such that it's just not viable. It's not actually going to produce the results I think that a lot of our institutional leaders are after. What I've been wondering for some time now is why it is that as institutions, we don't view our facilities as yet another technology, that we haven't spent the time to understand what can we do well when we're all together face-to-face in terms of instruction and learning, and what can we put into an online environment that can also be done very well, and how do we mix those two together so that we are in fact actually becoming more effective and efficient with our facilities, perhaps even at the regional comprehensives offering courses all year round instead of being off in the summers and having buildings empty for months at a time. Mm-hmm. We can become more effective and efficient and also serve more learners, which is something that we need to be able to do.
Well, you're anticipating what I might be showing on the next slide or two, but those are very important points. Carol.
For the emergence of the OPMs, you know, institutions that formerly were having difficulty, as you showed, the for-profits that are transitioning to other models and becoming not-for-profit, and maybe, you know, using the OPMs, the online program management organizations.
Companies, right?
Yes.
Well, again, anticipating something that might be on the next slide or two, but still, we haven't found much evidence of interest in working with OPMs. There seems to be very definitely a faculty bias against letting them in the door. Institutions that have used them report mixed results, overpromises that were not met, misunderstanding of the mission and the culture of the institution, too expensive for the results that they produce. And we are looking, some of the data there suggests that there's a new model for OPMs that addresses these issues and may be more viable, which is a disaggregation of their services on a fee per service basis rather than a share of tuition revenue. But it's still at the margin. It's not at a level that shows up significantly in the data. Yes?
So I'm wondering if the existence of a chief online learning officer may preclude an institution from necessarily needing an OPM, because it suggests perhaps a level of commitment in terms of the enterprise, which may mean there's additional resources to where there, you know, that those, while it may be a fee for service model, but that they don't need necessarily the full service.
Well, you know, what's the cause and what's the effect?
Exactly.
It can work in both directions. But one question we've asked in past year that was not repeated this year is that was a question about all the reasons you would not use an OPM. And one that comes up frequently, can't remember the percentage, but frequently, is we try to build internal capacity to deal with all of our issues. And you may not get there immediately, but that is a bias that leads the other way. Steve.
So I might be anticipating some of your coming slides, but as somebody who is at the ground level of one of those enterprise institutions you refer to, it helped to be pushed by a crisis, such as the Great Recession. And knowing that we are currently in the third longest period of prosperity post-World War II, and knowing how recessions tend to be really bad after long prosperity like that, we know that when the next one hits, it's not going to be positive, which will probably mean a crisis for higher education, which might mean opportunities for change. And we also know that the number of 18-year-olds are declining for the year 2026 because of the last recession. So I'm wondering how that's going to feed into things as well.
Good comments. And of course, we're just looking at some of the factors in a very complex situation. The state of the economy is clearly a factor in university and college enrollments at all times. High employment periods, low employment periods have very definite effects. And you need to factor that in. But I think I'm going to move ahead a little bit and at least show you my next two slides. That's all that's left. And then we can just have an open discussion. If you think you want to react to the data and try to tailor your program to take advantage of opportunities and avoid the pitfalls, I have a number of questions for you to think about. You know, is online leadership in place? If there is a clear leader of your online program, I think you're ahead of the game. Is a supportive infrastructure in place? Is there a committee structure? Is there commitment from leadership at the institution overall? Are online offerings random or coordinated? Is your online program the result of maybe a quarter of your faculty creating their own online courses without any big plan in place? Or is a program being designated, you will go online, you will not? Are those kinds of choices being made at the institution? Is there a process to set strategic priorities for online development? Are regional needs clear? And this was written from the perspective, again, of those mid-level and small enrollment institutions that need to focus more on their immediate population. Are the institution's strengths and reputation well understood? Maybe you have a strong reputation in nursing and allied health professions, and maybe that should be your main thrust online, even if you have a comprehensive on-ground program. Are local, regional, and national competition well understood? Do you know, remember, these are averages that I had put up here, but have you done the analysis to know what your competitors are? Are early online successes a foundation for further development? Have you had some winners, and can you build on what worked there? Or you can go too far in this direction and never then consider alternatives that might be successful in the future. What resources are available? Are you working with a fixed budget, or is there the opportunity, if you can sound the alarm, for concerted investment in a new approach? And is external expertise needed, and at what cost? Carol, that's where the question comes in of whether you need to bring another organization in to help you with these problems. Well, here are how I see regional and local institutions responding to enterprise-level competition and to the gradual separation out of winners and losers in terms of enrollment. One approach might be to prepare for an anticipated downturn. Resources are not available. You think you're doing what you can do. And the best practice might be to make sure you're not overly dependent on online enrollment and revenue, that a downturn is really going to damage the institution. Another approach might be to commit resources to growth despite the headwinds that I have displayed, to double down on your investment efforts and to compete for online growth. So those are probably the two extremes. More fine-tuned and perhaps realistic at most institutions. For regional institutions, I would raise the question of making the closeness of students, their proximity to the institution, an asset. Can the enterprise institutions compete on that basis? Probably not. So why not make that a more important asset by stressing, whoops, what did I do? Oh, here we go. Let's see. Wow, just at the right time. Sorry about this. Okay, here we are. So the downturn and anticipating it growth, and then to fine-tune the approach online, one is making an asset of your proximity to students by stressing face-to-face experiences. One way to do this is focus on blended learning. And having face-to-face experiences, the reason I use that kind of vague terminology is it doesn't have to be, 2 days a week in class and the rest of your course activity online. Maybe you just invite the students to come once a month and have an extended meeting. Maybe you create a social environment for your students. I think there's tremendous field for experimentation here on what will turn an essentially online program into one that is more personalized. We heard that term this morning, and more local in its focus. Focus on programs, focus your programs on the institutional strengths, what I mentioned before about being known for something and investing in that online, and employer needs. We're seeing in the survey results very little in the way of concerted effort to gather employer feedback. Much more can be done, and which institutions are going to be capable of doing that? I don't think it's the national institutions. It's going to be local ones that have made arrangements and worked with the local industry. And then a very unpopular one, discounting online tuition. We asked about that in our first two surveys. Less than 10% of institutions offer lower tuition for their online courses than their on-ground courses. Forget about the fact that on-ground requires a huge physical plant, security, et cetera, facilities for exercise and amusement, and so on. That gets averaged into the costs of your online education too, even though it's little used, if at all. Lots of opportunity here to discount tuition. We have seen a few very highly visible examples like what Georgia is doing right now with their $10,000 engineering degrees. But I think there's a tremendous potential here. In fact, about a third of institutions charge more for their online programs than their face-to-face programs. And you can probably think of other strategies too. The question, I guess, that I would crystallize is what can you do within, let's say, a 50-mile or 75-mile radius of your institution that national competition could not match? And perhaps those are the areas you might consider. But also your expectations should be tempered by the general trends that we're seeing here. So with whatever minutes we have left, let's hear any more comments from the group. And I think we may be actually out of time, but go ahead.
Ron, I'm still stuck on your slide showing how little we've changed in 25 years and how we teach online, where we show a video, have a discussion board, have a short assignment. And for those of you who are in the 18 states in the Midwest that are in the HLC, I'm hearing some pushback recently that the HLC is saying, well, that's just a correspondence course, or that's just a self-paced course that you happen to have digitized. That's not really an online course. So I'd be interested in talking with other people who are in the HLC about how we're making our courses not correspondence courses and doing more than what your slide was showing. And that's my concern going forward.
I think you would find examples where schools are doing more, but we're looking at close to 300 institutions here. And so you begin to see how far those new techniques have penetrated. And the answer is not terribly far at this point. Eric.
I'm just going to do a shameless plug for Ron. And he's done an awfully thoughtful job with this presentation, but I have to tell you, we've collected a lot of data through this research, and there's actually 2 other sessions here at the conference that I just want to do that shameless plug for. There's one later today around
something,
the 4:20 time slot, and then there's another one tomorrow morning, which is a great panel of chief online learning officers at 11 something, I think.
Yeah,
There
well, find them in your program. But this afternoon will be a much broader view of the new things we've learned in the 3rd Chloe survey, which will probably be published around the March-April timeframe this coming spring. Any other last questions? The last thing I would say is please fill out the evaluation form, slide, whatever it is this year. And thanks for your attention.